Ageism, Why Language Matters. And this is presented by Dr. Joellen Watson. Dr. Watson is a Learn member. She's a certified wellness and life coach and an advanced grief recovery specialist. She's dedicated her professional life to people's physical and behavioral health needs. Dr. Watson holds a Ph.D. in social welfare from the University of Washington. She's a licensed clinical social worker in Idaho and Washington, and a clinical supervisor in Washington. Her practice focus has been crisis intervention and therapeutic modalities using trauma-informed care. Her career includes direct services, clinical supervision, professor, lobbyist, and director or administrator in the public, nonprofit, and private sectors. She is a former sociology and social work tenure-track professor at Seattle Pacific University. And Dr. Watson can be heard on KRBX Radio Boise 89.9 FM every Tuesday from 4:30 to 5 for a live call-in talk show, Elementary Watson. At this time, I am pleased to turn it over to Dr. Watson for Ageism, Why Life Matters.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here today and to talk about this really important topic. And Mary, the way you introduced me, I realized I am going to reduce that introduction to a one-sentence line somehow. It just goes too much on and on. So anyway, thank you so much for this topic is fascinating. And we're right in the middle of, and I hope you recognize, we are moving from identifying a social problem to a movement. And we are in the midst of that. And sometimes it's really hard to see that for the forest for the trees, but we are in fact in a movement. And the way that you know that is this is the front of AARP's bulletin. And what it says is how we're changing America. An aging population is shaking up our country, what's happening and what it means. And it's a 10-page story on this very topic that we're talking about today. So if you know you've arrived in a social movement when you are in the front of an AARP magazine that goes out everywhere. So this was a very timely topic, and thank you so much. So we're ready for the next slide. Thank you. So I'm going to try to talk with you, not at you today. There's a lot of information to go through, and I'll do my best to really make this conversational. I come with positive intention, and this is a line that I learned from a member here, Leanne Nalen, when she did her presentation last spring, and I use this positive intention every time I speak and on Radio Boise. I mean to be inclusive. I mean to use the right language. Sometimes it's not going to be 100% correct. So please know that I come with positive intention, and I'm always open to feedback. If I need to be told something offline, get in touch. I might not get it right all the time, but my intention is today. So today we're going to look at the growing realization that ageism is another ism that requires change, an immediate change. It's layered over the other problematic isms, and that's classism, racism, sexism in all its forms, ableism, and some of these layers are, like, for example, queering ageism. It's the intersection of queer theory and ageism. And then ableism, think about being able, the whole notion of being able-bodied, and now adding able-mindedness to that whole process. And so, we start with the other isms, and then you add age to it, and you have a multi-layered complex social problem. So we're gaining momentum as a movement. We just showed that, and it's tied to other social justice movements, even around like the women's movement, civil rights, human rights, and a lot of this was tied to COVID-19 because we saw so much discrimination in healthcare during COVID-19. I would maintain that ageism occurs across the lifespan. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but not a lot because I really want to talk about the significant impact. Ageism really starts in its 50s. And I have a slide on this so you know it when you feel it. But it happens in 40s. And it happens to younger generations where we discount them because of their age. So on one side of the spectrum, you haven't been around long enough, you don't know anything, to you're dead wood on the other end. You're old, you're irrelevant. So, and it does happen across the lifespan. But today we're going to focus on the impact of 50 and over. And, like all good dialogue or all good movements, you have to have engaging dialogue. And so we have to learn how to talk and how to deal with ageism through personal engagement. But unlike other movements, we have to start with ourselves and the language that we use about aging that comes from our internal socialization. So that's why it's also personal introspection. We're going to do something about that. So if we could go to the next, great. So objectives for today, we're going to do a starting exercise in just a second about perception matters, and this will require you to put some things in the chat, so you can get ready to do that. I like to do a slide on in generational divides because it's really hard to know. I mean, what's the silent generation? Really, what was the boomer? And we'll look at a slide about that. So we look at the 7 generations that are alive today. We'll define ageism. We're going to do a few facts. We're going to use an ecological framework, which I think is a really easy way to kind of think about and organize our thinking. I'm going to skip the cost of ageism because I'm just going to tell you it's costing us billions, and just in the workplace. So I'm not going to go over those numbers because I think we have so much to do, but I am going to do quite a bit on our calls to action, what to do. So I think we're ready to go to the next. There we go. Okay, first of all, let me just say, don't get stuck on the exactness. These are kind of slippery categories, and there's really no agreed upon formula about what this is. So, there's some generations that go over. Generally, it's accepted by the demographers that it's a 15 to 16 year span. So the greatest generation is people who are now 95 and over. Now, they're not going to be around with us much longer. But that's that greatest generation. They're still here. The next generation is the silent generation, and those people were born from 1928 to 1945, and their ages 77 to 94. The baby boomers, probably the people who are kind of leading this whole new movement, is the born 1946 to 1964, and I'm in that category, 54 to 76. Gen Xers, 1965 to 1979, or get this, it had a little thing, okay, 80/80. When I looked this up, the people who are talking about this kind of have them, if you're 1979 or born in 80, you're Gen X, and that's why I have give or take. So they're 41 to 56, and I would maintain that this is a group that's starting to feel ageism. The millennials, they're the Gen Yers, 1981 to 1994, and look at, now we have 2 years, 96. And they're the 25 to 40-year-olds. Gen Zs, lots of talk about Gen Zs right now. They're a force to be reckoned with. 1997 to 2013, their ages 11 to 26. And the alphas were born in the 2010s, and they'll go to 2010s to 12, to up to 2025, and they're now currently, like 10 and below. And the betas haven't been born yet, but we're already naming them. So, there's a group called Generations Over Dinner, and the goal of Generations Over Dinner is to do this cross-pollination of talking over a dinner with as many generations as you can get at the table right now. And look how many generations we could have at the table. 7 generations. I mean, it's just pretty unheard of to do that. And really, cross-talking is a great way to inform about how people are feeling and what they're thinking about age and aging, and I would say dying. This Generations Over Dinner started with conversations about dying over, dinner. So having those discussions. Let's go to the next slide. This is an exercise, and I'd like, if you have a pen and paper, great. If you want to just chat, put something straight in the chat, that's great. But first of all, I want you to clear your mind, take a deep breath, no self-censoring, and these are your honest first thoughts. So I want you to think of an old person, real or imagined. And without thinking too deeply, first impressions, write down or put in the chat the first 5 words or phrases that come to mind. I'm going to give this a second, and then I'm going to jump in here and look. Carrie says, amazing, busier than me. Anybody else have any interesting, knowledgeable? So here's the question. Without thinking too deeply, think of an old person, real or imagined, and write down what your thoughts are. Wisdom, grace, understanding, active, elegant, kind, frail, loving smile, knowledgeable. Well, without taking too much time, enduring, you guys are great. Maybe it's because you work with this population, because a lot of times when you ask this question, you will get, there's closed to new experiences. You get about 60% negative images. So, it's great to see in the chat some really positive things. And when I think of an old person, like out beyond my category, I think there's still 1 or 2. Sometimes I think about frailty, and sometimes I think of incompetence. Sometimes, and this is when I'm unfiltered. And I feel, and part of this is socialization to think about old age and distancing myself from. We're going to talk a little bit more technologically challenged, opinionated. We're going to talk a little bit more about the self and at the micro level. And that direct quote, getting old sucks, stubborn, afraid of changes, vulnerable. Really, we've got the full range here. And I put at the bottom of this, thanks to Becca Levy, if you were going to have one book in your library right now that I think is such a great take, it's this book, and it's called Breaking the Age Code by Becca Levy. And I think right now it is probably the most accessible. It's great research in there. She does calls to action, and she does this exercise in her older adult class at Yale and gets people talking about this. And what she claims is, in her research, and it's empirically validated, that beliefs about aging more than any other factor, including gender, income, social background, loneliness, or functional health, your beliefs alone can reduce or add 8 years to your life. So just think about that for a second. 8 years by beliefs alone. So that is a self-vision of how you're going to live your life. And one of the things that I would say is why we're going to start in our calls to action with the micro in the ecological framework is because the one thing that we can have an impact on is how we think about ourselves, our personal thoughts. A lot of our external factors we can't have complete control over. We have control about how we think about ourselves, and that will change your lifespan by 8 years. I just heard, I see that Michelle said that book's on the shelf at most of our local libraries. You don't need to worry about this. I give it in a citation at the end. You have, yeah, it's Breaking the Age Code by Levy, but I give you a list of the things that I'm quoting from today at the end of the last slide. So you'll see what I used. Let's do the next slide. Thank you so much for participating and for your unfiltered, and I'm so glad to see some real positive concepts around aging. So aging is, okay, so I put up there, you know, we might know our definition, but I'll tell you, we know it when we feel it. And just think about that. When did you, if you are in this 50 and over age group, when was the first time you felt like, am I invisible? What age was that? And so ageism is very complex and multifaceted, and it requires more analysis than a single definition. It started in the late 60s. It was coined, ageism was coined by a newspaper person named Robert, I think it's Robert Butler. And I didn't cite him because every single article that you read will have his definition of ageism. So I've added some other ones here. Ageism is a source of oppression through a process of systemic or systematic stereotyping and discrimination against people because they are old. And it starts with thoughts and it moves to feeling. And in those feelings, there's action. So it's an actual diagram. It's a moving target from thinking to feeling to acting. Ageism is based on beliefs about the impact of biological aging on people. I was reading this great comment in the chat. Impact of biological aging on people of all ages, which relates to fear and prejudice across the lifespan. There's an actual function to it, and that is trying to distance ourselves from the characteristics of people that we don't like. And so it's really based, as most discrimination is, on fear and prejudice. Ageist practices are permeated with our experience of the chronological, social, biological, and psychological life course. Stereotypes, and I want to say this in a different way, are used to quickly recognize and assess others. So that is why we stereotype. It's the brain's way, it's our way of looking at someone, assessing them from a marker, and it could be gray hairs, balding, gray hair, significant marker, wrinkles, significant marker. And so these are ways that we try to, stereotyping is a way that we try to recognize and assess others. The simplest definition I saw is ageism is prejudice or discrimination based on the grounds of age derived from the desire of young and middle-aged group to separate and elevate themselves from aging. And I would maintain that at some point, and the literature didn't talk much about this, but I think this is where it lands, it's a fear of dependency, lack of control, and ultimately our own death. And we don't cope well with thinking about our own death. And if we start there and work backward, we would trace it to, I think, a fear of dying, and then a fear of being dependent in our old age and not having control, losing ability to drive. So this is a way that people, and ourselves, by the way, distance ourselves from this biological process that we're going through. So let's just talk about a few facts. Ageism is considered to be the most widespread and socially accepted form of prejudice. And again, it's conditioning, and it starts in our youth. The researchers have looked back at as early as age 5 for negative connotations about growing old. And for the first time in history, there are now more people in the world over the age of 64 than under the age of 5. So this is going to go on for a while. In 2020, 25% of the workforce in the United States was over the age of 55. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 or over. That's an aging population that is coined by politicians and economists as the silver tsunami. And as you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, we are not prepared. We are not prepared. Yes, getting older is better than the alternative, but if we really think about the dependency that happens in late old age, I think we think that, and I hope we think that, and we need to change that, and we need to have supports to do that, which is what this group is all about. People are afraid of it. Caregivers for older adults. Here's where we're not prepared. Hello, you guys all know this. There's just not enough people in our institutions, and this goes to the next slide, and in medicine, to care for the specific and unique needs of older adults. And right now, and this is shocking, I think someone brought this up last time, is there are only 2 acting gerontologists in all of Idaho, and one of them is retiring. So in terms of geriatricians in the US, we have 8,220 full-time geriatricians. And those are people who are trained to really take care and understand the aging body, those biological markers, and I would say that understand the implication of medications and how to take them. And we need something like 50% more is what public health is calling for. We're living longer. Boomers are the first generation in history to have modern medicine from birth on, and it's just getting better and more specific. Now, COVID kind of reduced some of those, those numbers, but still, modern medicine has really changed our longevity and our knowledge about how to live well, better for longer, and have a shorter end time. I totally agree. There has to be, quality of life, and what that means varies among people, but love it. I will just say one more thing about the geriatricians. The reason it seems like they've traced this back to uh, just the negative idea of taking care of older bodies, older people, and so the younger generation is not going into this kind of medical field. But also the reimbursement rate for geriatricians because of our insurances over the age of 62, 65, whenever you take it, is so low. So this is a specialty that is not getting paid at the level that is required to do the extra education. So let's go to the next. I'm pretty conscious of time here, so there's a lot to go through. I want to, I think the ecological framework is still one of the best ways to understand it, a social problem when we see it. And what I would say is, and as we go through this, language matters in all spheres, how we talk about this. So let's start at the structural level, at the high level, and that's macro. And, I would have listed all the ways that we can see ageism, but it was honestly a little overwhelming for me and kind of depressing. So I'm just going to tell you about them. You know, just think about media, the silver screen, TV. When was the last time you looked for a birthday card for someone over the age of 50? The photos, the pictures, the way people who are aging are depicted on the front of birthday cards is astounding. And so, and then in your 40s and 50s, when you have a birthday, it's marked by black balloons. And kind of a depressing idea of, oh, you're getting older. So this is pop culture. It's in newspapers, it's in magazines, it's on social media. Gina Davis has really sparked a movement in Hollywood. Before this movement, I think it was about 5 years ago, there were no women in leading roles in movies for about 10 years prior to her getting active in Hollywood. And some of it was because she wasn't getting any roles. So it made her aware. Let's just think about at the macro level, healthcare, access to healthcare. When you reach age 70, if you're female, you are dropped off the list of required having a mammogram every year. They say you get your letter and it says as needed, or if clinically indicated. So there's just access to healthcare. That's one example. There were a lot of implications around healthcare bias during COVID-19. The attention paid to residents in residential care facilities. And then mental health is included here. And there's some disparity in how well people are cared for. My last job was designing and building and managing a psychiatric facility for older adults, inpatient. The amount of misdiagnosis and over medication of people that we brought into that hospital was staggering. We had to do almost a medication reduction or medication vacation on almost every patient that looked confused. They were diagnosed with dementia. In fact, many of them turned out to be over medicated and cleared up enough to be able to do self-care once we got them on the right prescription for their issues. The workplace. Ever been want to change your job after the age of 50? And how hard that is? It's almost impossible. There's mandatory forced retirement. There's non-hiring. There's underemployment, not to point out any specific area, but there are a lot of highly qualified older adults that cannot find any other work or end up being greeters or bus drivers or other things that are great. They're just for them underemployed. There's lots of implications of incompetence, whether it's real or not. I mean, right now we can hear competency testing in our elected officials. We can hear that. That's a why not competency testing for all of our elected officials? But it seems to be fair target to be able to say anyone over the age of, say, 65 or 70, that where there should be competency testing. The multi-generational teams at work are devalued, even when research shows that a multi-generational team is higher in productivity. So that's another kind of macro level. Let's just think about the anti-aging or beauty industry. So much money is spent on anti-aging creams, hair dyes. It's all youth-oriented and anti-aging. The Botox, teens using Botox. Creams, lotions, foods, supplements, testosterone, hormones, and this is all based on fighting looking old. So, and then there's this kind of general belief that older adults are more trouble because they're not contributing to society. I'm just going to say a couple more. In government, this is just one example. If you are over 70, you are no longer required to be on a jury pool. And I was excused from jury duty because I turned 70 this last year. And at first I was like, yeah, all right. And then I was thinking, wait a minute, I have value. My opinion on a jury would be of value. And so why is that? We know the educational system. Let's just think about science for a second, excluding older adults in clinical trials. Generally, 65 is cut off for clinical trials. And a lot of times when you fill out a survey, the block of age stops at 65. So it's like up to 65, and you won't see 65 and over as a category to check. So these are just the structural things that happen at the macro level that we face every single day, that are ageist in nature, saying you have less value as you age. The meso or interpersonal, this is where it really gets interesting. As if macro wasn't enough, these are the interpersonal interactions, family, caregivers, friends, at the store. You know, by your appearance, and this has happened to me, by my appearance, someone asks if I need to have help with my groceries, or standing in line, I'm offered a seat. Now, I appreciate the intent around that, but there's an assumption because of my age that I'm not strong enough to carry my groceries, or that I need to sit down. And, you know, again, there's this delicate balance of, you know, overlooking at microaggressions and appreciating what people say, and then also not distancing myself, because sometimes I think, well, wait a minute, I'm not old. And that's my, you know, that's my kind of default. And by the way, I am old. But, you know, again, this is this internal dialogue that goes on. And, you know, it's a narrative of decline, and it starts showing up in language and direct interactions in the intergenerational relationships in our family, colleagues. And I don't know if you've ever had this happen. You know, I haven't, but I think I've done it. There's this whole thing around benevolent speak. And that's this being said, oh, you're cute, or sweetie, or dear. And or this talking in this kind of sing-songy, or assuming you can't hear, so people talk louder to you. The honeys, you're so cuddly. Yeah, this is language that happens to older adults. And, it really is unintended language use that infantilizes. Just think about interpersonal, just think about mezzo at that level, thinking about people over 70 being sexually active. And if you're over 50 or over 60, when you go talk to your doctor, does anybody ever ask you about your GP on your yearly exam? Does anybody ever talk to you about your sexual life, about how that's going? It's an important part of life. Touch, feel, sexual intercourse, feeling alive is important. And the research shows ages 70 and over are having regular sex, but nobody talks about it. So again, it's
Joellen, just a time check. I want to make sure you've got about 5 minutes. So I want to make sure you get to your call to action, your actions.
Okay, great. Thank you. We could have done this I could have had a whole quarter of class on this. So the micro, I'm just going to tell you really quickly, this is where it gets tricky because, my whole business is focused on regeneration, rejuvenation, creating a new vision for yourself. It's like, that call to action. Is it a call to action to look and feel young and to be young and have a young mind? Where is that balance of moving toward the thinking youthfully, being youthful, and that is positive? And so it really gave me some pause to think. I'm not going to change this, but it's this notion of how we think, feel, and act towards self and their age group. So the real call to action, and we can go to the next line, is to the next slide. I'm sorry I had to cut this short. Is really about where do we start? And I think we really start at the level of our internal dialogue. It's the place that we can control the most, and it stops self-directed ageist language. And that requires some self-awareness from ourselves. And the question is, are we reinforcing a youth-focused culture? The interpersonal or mezzo, this is where we really call out, when we hear it, ageist language. And we don't, again, this gracious, compassionate self-talk and about to others when you hear about memory loss or senior moments, or talking about thinking of the impact that it has. And then getting to then focusing on the institutional, cultural, structural. Ageism is a human rights issue, and we need to have age-friendly cities, medical care, every aspect as we move forward. So finally, the last slides, and Dara, is this webinar moved to can people hear this, and will the slides be available?
They will. The email will come out this weekend to members.
Okay,
and it will be the deck and everything will be there. And we are actually going to include this in our fall curriculum for the community too.
Great. Okay, so you can read about me. You'll also see me at the end of the month. These are the things I do: is recovery from emotional pain for client groups, and grief recovery, aging powerfully with purpose, creating your vision. And then the last slide is my contact information. And sorry, the last slide is your sources. And let's go to that really quick. So here's the sources. These are studies that I thought were the most interesting. You can get these, but Breaking the Code, How Your Beliefs About Aging Determine How Long and Well You Live is a really good read, actually. So thank you so much for your time and your attentiveness, and I hope you found it useful.